I got it.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay, we're recording now. So, hello everybody. Welcome back to another game development talk here at the Harvard Game Devs. I am Rumi Khan. Today, I'll be talking about my presentation, which is really more of a polemic, if you will, where I will be arguing this very, very controversial gaming opinion that I will be arguing against choices in video games. I'll be very specific when I say choices, but I am arguing against choices. I think choices are bad. I think we should have less choices. I think the game developer tyrants, authoritarians should be able to dictate your future as a player with more authority and with less leeway for player liberty. So why am I preaching the road to serfdom, but for video games? Well, let me explain. And first, before I talk about choices, I'm going to use two games as case studies, which I think are games that are based around choices and are good. These are games I really, really like. And they're games where fundamentally the gameplay is based around making decisions. But they're both very clever about how they let the player make their decisions. And the two games I'll be talking about today are the Henry Stickman Collection and Long Live the Queen. Now, I would be surprised if the viewer has heard of both of these games. If you have, congratulations. You have a very similar mind to me. But I will be explaining both of them really quickly to explain why I think these are both good choices. These are both indie games, relatively obscure, but popular in their own subgenres. One is a collection of remade Flash games from the Newgrounds era. The other is an anime visual novel type role-playing strategy game that is far less cutesy than the title screen might imply. Although you can become a magical girl in the story. All right, so what is the Henry Stickmin collection and why do I think it's a good example of choices? Well, I will just it's hard to explain in words what this game is. So I'm just gonna show you a playthrough and skip through it and kind of talk about how it is. So hopefully this video should work on the recording. If it ends up being a bit silly, then definitely let me know. But hopefully this shouldn't be a problem. But let's play it. All right, so the premise of a Henry Stickmin game is pretty simple. You're the Henry Stickmin, and you're in a situation and you just have choices. So you can pick shovel, which is what the left player did, and then it just plays out a little cutscene for you. Let's see what happened when you pick your shovel. Oh no, you hit a gas main and died. All right, well, then you have a fail, and then you can go back and retry, and then you just choose a different choice. So this time he chose a TNT, and it didn't work out too well for him. He also just exploded again. That's funny. Okay, let's try the teleporter. You know, teleportation, that always works in media, right? It did not work. Oh no. Well, then let's try the wrecking ball, right? Hopefully he got a permit for that gigantic machine. Oh dear, he did not get a permit for that gigantic machine. Maybe the laser? Oh, see, that's working pretty well. That's pretty good. Oh no. All right, well, there's got to be one more choice, right? The disguise has to work.
Yeah? How did we lose one? I think we should throw it in the back, just to be safe. You ever wonder why there's a bank out here? Well, I think it's supposed to be like more of a vault, you know? Oh, that makes sense.
It's good lore. All right. So that's actually the first Henry Stickmin game, which is by far the shortest, because you had only one branching decision path, and there were 5 fails and then 1 success. Now, the thing is with these games is that the sequels are a bit more interesting. So this is Into the Airship, I think, or Infiltrating the Airship, which is I think the 3rd or 4th game, depending on how you count them. And each of these branching paths are different situations where you had 3 options to fail and 1 option to continue, and then 2 more options to fail. And the game essentially plays out as this really weird interactive story where you're just watching a cutscene, and then Henry has to like jump over a ledge or get across or defeat a bad guy, and you have like five different choices, which are different items or different techniques. You click on one, it usually backfires horribly, and Henry Stickman dies in a hilarious way. And then you go back, then you try again and see what happens. So in a way, the gameplay is not really anything more than just clicking on a. I mean, there are some quick time events that act like choices, but in reality, the choice set is very limited, and the way the game plays out, and the way you're kind of incentivized to play the game, um, is that you want to get every single fail. Like you want to click every single option, and then like if you succeed, you want to go back using the map and see what happens if you click the wrong option. And that's kind of how you complete the game. So I will say this: I love the Henry Stickmin games. These are really funny. They're absolutely hilarious. They're filled with funny references, and it's just a really unique way of playing a game before. And you don't really see that in AAA titles. Like I can't think of another serious popular series like that plays quite like Henry Stickmin or has this kind of gameplay style. But while the only thing you do as a player in the Henry Stickmin games is make decisions, at the end of the day, the content of the game does not come from the fact that you made decisions. It comes from the funny things that happened. And any Henry Stickmin player will just make every single decision anyway. They will go back and watch all the fails. So, like, at the end of the day, your enjoyment of the game is utterly independent of what decisions you made. In fact, you could have just randomized all the decisions you made on your path, and you'd have gotten the exact same content delivered the exact same way, which is really crazy to think about because number one, the games are still fun, and number two, the only thing you do as the player is make decisions. And those decisions are ultimately meaningless, not because they don't do anything in the gameplay. They do. They call those different things, but because you as the player want to see the result of every single option. And I think that's actually really good. And I'll explain shortly. Because this is Henry Stickmin is an example of what I'll call top-down decision making, where your decision making affects the story. Like you're making a decision that's very simple, like choosing items on a menu, with the expectation that this will affect a broader story. This is what I'll call a bigger picture decision, right? A non-gameplay decision. Okay. Now I'm going to show you another game that is all about choice, except every single choice also matters in the complete opposite way, which is Long Live the Queen. All right, so this is a lot of things. So I'm going to explain this game real quick. So Long Live the Queen is an anime visual novel type game where you play as this princess named Elodie who has about 40 weeks before she's crowned queen because her mother got assassinated or killed, depending on what you find out. And the way the game works is you have 40 weeks, so they're 40 units of time. Each week you spend doing you take three lessons or two lessons in all of these various skills. You can like level up skills slowly, and then you can mess with your mood and then a story event happens and you can make decisions in story events. And the game might seem like a fun anime game, but the goal of the game is to actually make sure your princess survives to her coronation. So just survive a year as the crown princess becoming queen. Because turns out her kingdom is like in utter shambles. Multiple in wars, a civil war, peasant rebellions, like multiple assassination attempts, court intrigue, violence, magic, military conflict, all kinds of stuff happens in the course of the game, and you can like die like constantly. Um, like for example, if you don't take certain skills, you just die. Now, obviously, there are multiple ways to like. For example, halfway through the game, there's a very infamous event called the chocolate event, and if what'll happen is you will be like coming back and then you will receive a letter from your family member saying, hey, I got this chocolate from this famous merchant in this country, you should have it, and if you eat the chocolate you die, right? Now how do I prevent that? Well, if you happen to have invested in divination, you will foresee it. Okay, if you happen to have invested in both in both trade and production, then you would know that that merchant company doesn't make chocolate. If you happen to invest in the decoration skill, then you would know that chocolate is not arranged that way, and you would be able to dodge it. If you happen to invest in poisoning, you would know that the chocolate is poisoned. And I think if you happen to invest in Novan Affairs, which is your country, you would know that that family member wants you dead. Or if you had happened to gone down a story path that you figure out that family member wanted you dead. would do. Now, those are a whole bunch of options that this gave you that actually impact the story, but the only way those happen to you is through gameplay decisions. So not only do you decide exactly what skills your character has and what their mood is, but literally every single story event has multiple decisions and all of them matters. Literally no decision in the game doesn't matter, to the point where I cannot explain the story to you because the story has so many branching paths. I believe there were like over a million possible combinations and epilogues you can have, just because the entire story itself is like so like there's so many paths. It's like it's absolutely crazy and just so much hidden stuff going behind the scenes. Basically, every single gameplay decision you make, whether you're clicking options in the visual novel story or training your character in these various skills, has a significant impact on the way the story plays out, whether or not you die and what happens. Like, say, who you marry, or how the invasions go, or whether or not a civil war happens, or whether or not you find a certain family member wants to kill you, or whether or not that family member ends up marrying you. It's pretty crazy. So this is the total opposite, I think, of the Henry Stickmin games. Because after I played through this game, I felt done. I didn't feel like I needed to go replay the game to get all the possible options. Because the game is so the wiki is so gigantic that it like that me having made the decisions through the gameplay was all I needed to get the full experience. Now, why is this different from the Henry Stickmin games? If I just described a game where you just make a bunch of choices and then the choices affect the story and what happens. Well, the choices you make in Long Live the Queen they're all of another type, which I will call gameplay choices, which are choices you make as a player in a video game that you feel is naturally part of the gameplay. It's not something that is a higher level than the gameplay. That seems really weird, but when I start giving you examples, I think you'll understand what I mean. I think Long Live the Queen is an excellent example of pure gameplay choices where I feel like the story naturally evolves in a way that reflects my gameplay. Like imagine if I played a Call of Duty game and like depending on how I moved infinitesimally, like the storyline changed in a realistic way, which is how things happen in real life. And in real life, if you're late to like your meetings, the story changes. And very few video games can do that because that's just technically really hard to do. But because of the way Long Live the Queen plays out, literally every decision can transform the story. Like it's actually crazy how many ridiculous endings. Like it could end with like a French Revolution. It could end with like a singular tyrant slave princess, a magical queen. It can end with your country getting invaded. It can end with you becoming a vassal to like an evil empire. It's pretty crazy. All right. So here is my argument about choices. Choices, and these are when I say choices, I don't mean gameplay choices. I mean these overarching Henry Stickmin style choices can often appear meaningful in games, but in reality, I find they only provide three things. They're either aesthetic, they push along predetermined paths, or they do nothing. And the negative consequence of sacrificing linearity for the sake of these big non-gameplay choices is bad, poor storylines and confusing player choice interactions. And I'll give examples of all of these. So when I say non-gameplay choices, what am I talking about? I'm saying when you're playing like Assassin's Creed and a gameplay choice would be like, should I move forward in this millisecond or should I move forward in that millisecond? Right? How do I want to like take this tower? Versus a non-gameplay choice, which is like during a dialogue option, I can press X to choose this option and O to choose that option. That's not in the gameplay. That's a story level decision. So like in my opinion, those kind of like Mass Effect style decisions are no different from choosing the little options in the Henry Stickmin games. While I think choosing what move to throw out in a fighting game is more akin to choosing what story path to follow in Long Live the Queen. So let me give you some examples of why I think this. So, oh yeah, so let me continue with this what I just said, which is maybe we'd be better off with a more linear game or choices that reflected more in actual gameplay decisions rather than any higher level decision making. So I like Long Live the Queen because every single choice I make is part of the gameplay and it naturally affects the storyline. There's no like weird disconnect between them. So my argument is that unless you can make your game story directly sync up with gameplay, then by having these high level by having a non-linear story, something will be lost. That is a radical claim. I'm saying that unless you can make the gameplay and the storyline directly match, like in Long Live the Queen, if you try to rely on this hackneyed over top choice system, you will lose something in your story. And I'll give some examples of that. So here are some examples of that. So I don't know if you recognize any of these three examples, but I'll go with the top left one first, which is Fire Emblem Three Houses. Fire Emblem Three Houses has a lot of top, like what I'll call big tier story decisions. For example, in the beginning, you choose what house you want to go to. Throughout the game, you have minor little decisions like, um, um, actually no, there's no other major decision than choosing what house you go to. Like there's some small ones that like in one path that branch off into another path, but otherwise there are basically three, technically four predetermined paths, and your big tier story decision puts you along those four paths. But the actual gameplay decisions you make don't actually affect the plot. That's crazy, right? So let's think about that. In Fire Emblem, the gameplay decisions you make are, how do you train your units, what weapons to give them, what to do in battle. But like, in terms of the actual plot of the story, like whether or not Casper dies on mission 12, like literally doesn't matter. It does not affect the story at all. All that mattered is like to the actual story is like what house you chose, which is really strange on one hand, but you know what? We'll accept that. Now I'm going to say that that actually makes the storyline weaker. And the answer is because of the way the game is structured. When I beat one of the paths in Fire Emblem Three Houses, you kind of want to beat the other paths because you realize as a player by following a predetermined path, following one of the various paths in the Henry Stickman games, you have lost a bunch of fails in the other path. And you want to go check them out. And that's kind of crazy. Like that seems really unnatural because the game doesn't let you do that easily. It expects you to have a finished story when you finish one of the paths, but it's clear that you don't. It's almost like an unfinished experience, even though the game is quite long and quite good. The other parts of the game suffer for this. For example, the support conversations are really good. The characters are very well written, but because the game has this weird, like non-linear structure, because the game is not linear, it has to have this modular effect. The characters never change, and it sucks because the characters are so well written that it really sticks out to me that some of them do not change reasonably. Dorothea only changes in a very linear way. Characters like Raphael are like utterly static, and it actually sticks out even worse because the characters are, in my opinion, well written. So I think the gameplay and the storyline suffers a lot. And I know this is a really crazy opinion to have as a Fire Emblem fan, but my take is that if Fire Emblem Three Houses gave up its main gimmick and was actually a linear story, then I think its story would be even better than it is now. Now, there is something to be said that there's something inherently interesting with this like branching paths idea. But I think in practice, if you cannot connect your branching paths to gameplay, then you're just playing a worse version of Henry Stickmin, right? If they want to have the branching paths, you should make it like Long Live the Queen, where your branching paths are organically baked into the gameplay, where maybe you depending on unit deaths or unit compositions or something that naturally happens within the gameplay and the story, then you choose your three houses. Um, I think the worst example of choices that are just utterly meaningless and top level is the ending of Mass Effect 3, which I have shown a picture of, and I will say no more. But if you know what I'm talking about, then you feel that deep rage as to being tricked. And I'll give you my favorite example of like why of like game developers just being utterly degenerate with this, which is this moment in Bioshock Infinite where you're at like this like resort with Elizabeth, and there's this moment where like these two people come up and they like give Elizabeth these two brooches. One is a brooch of a bird cage, and the other is a brooch of a bird being free. Okay, that seems like really symbolic to like the themes of the game. And then she's like, "Hey, choose a case." I was like, holy oh my god, I have to choose a case. Oh my god, that this is gonna be meaningful. This is gonna come back later. Do you know what happens when you choose this case? She just wears it the entire game and that's it. It never even comes up ever again. I don't think it does it ever. I don't think it comes up ever again. No, not even once. Why did I have to make this decision? Why is this in the game? What did this add? I just got tricked. Like the game is just making you think that it's not linear. But like to what end? Wouldn't it be more interesting if Elizabeth chose the thing herself and said something meaningful about birds or bird cages? Why have the player choose? Like the story is just worse off. I think that if you want to have these choices actually be part of your like have the choice to be part of an interesting story, then you have to make them come out of the gameplay where if the MC in Bioshock shot a certain unit here, then that changes the story. Now there are a couple of games that do something like this. Black Ops 2, which is a crazy example, actually has a bit of this in the gameplay where like killing certain units actually does change the story. Some Fire Emblem games do this a bit. Like I think Awakening does it a bit if like I think Lucina goes down. But I think games should be relying way more on gameplay changing the story outcomes than these top-down. Here is a branching path moment. Choose A or B to get the first half of the game, and then choose B to get the second half of the game, right? Because we just split the game in half for no reason. And now we have two half-baked plots instead of one full plot we could have spent all our developer budget on, right? So, I mean, that's kind of a controversial take. Now, I think to sum up my complaints, I will let ProZD do the talking. Now, swear warning, but I mean, we're all over 18, so I think we're okay with swear words. But I love this video a lot because this video speaks to me, so I'll just play it. Oh, oh no, I want to play the video.
Now it's time to finish the job. Goodbye, Archibald.
Why are you doing this?
Because my master told me to. King Dragon sends his regards.
Oh, fuck this. Fuck this. Let's negotiate.
No thanks. King Dragon sends...
Where is Prince Horus?
I don't know. King Dragon... It's a good thing I always carried 2 guns.
So yeah, obviously ProZD is making fun of the fact that like it's so common in AAA games to just have these meaningless upper level decisions that don't matter at all. Like why even have them? It's just very foolish. So I'm gonna give you 3 examples where I feel like the gameplay choices do matter in these kind of games, and 2 of them are by the genre, and one of them is a linear game. So in strategy games like EU4 and in fighting games like Street Fighter, your gameplay choices do matter. They matter a lot because the outcome of the game is determined directly by the decisions you make. That organic storylines can be crafted in strategy games like Civ and EU4 because even though the games are obviously not linear, every single thing that happened is like kind of organically created by your own decisions. And I mean that's pretty crazy. And this kind of branching path system is an attempt to like Riemann's sum approximates such an experience, and it just doesn't sound very effective. It's just it's a very inaccurate estimation. Um, so I'll give you an example. Metal Gear Solid for the PS1 has a linear story that's the same every single way, but the way the story is told is such that the player does feel agency because the story is so intermixed with the gameplay that like even though the story is linear, you feel like you as Solid Snake had an impact on what happened in the plot. And even though you really didn't, right, like right, it does feel it feels more immersive, and it feels like your choices you made impact like the result. And it's interesting because the game directly references just gameplay decisions you made, right? For example, like whether or not you use a lot of tranquilizer dots or shot people to death. Often cutscenes will play during the action and characters will comment on it. I think the most famous example is that there's a boss who just gets up and reads out your PS1 memory card to you. I mean, that's pretty crazy. So these are games where you feel like the choices you make as a player, whether in the game or in real life, actually impact the course of the story. That's pretty crazy. Um, so, but let's talk about branching story paths games. I'm gonna give you 2 examples of I think games people could use to say, wait, no, Rumi, I think you're underselling branching stories. You know, like not every single game that isn't a fighting game or grand strategy game does not need to have a linear story. Like, why can't I just have a story game where there are like 4 endings and you just choose them? And maybe they'll bring up Detroit Become Human or Catherine as examples of games like that. And you know what? That's a fair point. Detroit Become Human and Catherine are pretty okay games. You know, they're pretty good. But I will make the radical claim. I will reject qualification. I will reject moderation in exchange for my radical position that even then I think that by having this branching story path, you as the consumer are being sold short and you are being tricked by the false Mass Effect 3 ending style of decision making into thinking you've gotten a complete experience, when in reality you have not traversed every single path in your Henry Stickman collection. So Catherine, of course, anyone who's played Catherine knows that you can't just stop the game after playing one ending. You must repeat the entire game to get the other ending, where you go with the other Catherine, right? Well, and Detroit Become Human. I mean, like, I don't know if you really want to play the game more than once, to be honest. But like, if you had such an inclination, maybe you'd want to explore all the paths. Although I would say just buy the Henry Stickmin collection instead of doing that if you want to play Detroit Human. So My answer is, if you want to play a game with branching story paths, go download the Henry Stickman collection. Right? That's the only game with branching story paths I approve of. Otherwise, you want to play a game with the gameplay effects of story, go purchase Long Live the Queen, and you will see what I mean. So, this is my super spicy hot sauce take on why I don't like choices. I don't like it when the game's like, hey, do you want the bird cage or the free bird decision like brooch for Elizabeth? Like, that's ridiculous. We should not be doing that. Like, come on. Uh, and if you do, then make sure to have a map where you can go back and see all the fails and like easily navigate to see what you missed. So, in other words, y'all should be more like Henry Stickmin or Long Live the Queen. So, that's my presentation. If any questions, hit me. I'm ready. Any complaints, put them in the comments below. I will reply to the comments if people are mad. So
I will just say, when it comes to the design philosophy around the Henry Stickmin games, it's interesting that a lot of the times they will reference other like a specific storyline will reference what happened in a different storyline because the game knows you're going to go through all of the games. For example, I don't want to go too much into spoilers, but they'll reference things like the teleporter's ability to work and things like that, and just that may not have occurred. You may not have like gotten that. Like, if they assume that like you're only going to play it once, then it's a very risky strategy because you may not have gotten that particular fail, and you'd be like, what is this referencing? But because they reference it, it sort of implies that they had some understanding that their game was a game that was going to be played through all possibilities over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, the devs know that you're going to get every single fail, right? But like, do the Fire Emblem Three Houses devs think every single player is going to go through every path? I think they think that the ideal player, I think, okay, like, here's a question. If I'm the Three Houses development team and I want to say, here's my vision for how an ideal player needs to navigate my game. Is their ideal vision play through one of the paths, or is their ideal vision play through all the paths? What do you think?
I would argue. Okay, so first of all, I haven't played it, but judging by the fact that they made it like modular, and I'm assuming you play like similar missions on regardless of what path you do,
They're
because
similar.
they have. Okay, because they have that similarity, I'm gonna argue that maybe they only expect you to play it like once or maybe twice. Because otherwise, if they truly expected you to play it 4 times, then all of these 4 paths would have a great degree of difference. I'm saying because there's a similarity to them, then essentially you're essentially repeating content, which isn't very fun in a lot of cases.
My personal opinion is that I think they imagined that the ideal player would play twice and then the hardcore player would play 4 times, but like, I don't know, one of the paths is just blatantly unfinished in my opinion, and like the paths don't overlap. Like the problem is that all the paths are identical in the first half, and then in the second half they all diverge, so that has interesting side effects. So
then why wouldn't you just give the choice in the second half of the
I have
game?
no idea. It's so silly. Like well, see, the first half is identical except for the characters you use, right? So
okay,
it's slightly different in the first half, and there are some like random character moments, and you can only support with certain people. But like in terms of the actual gameplay content, it's basically identical. So
yeah,
the way Three Houses really plays to me is it plays as like basically 3 separate like games that are different than each other, which is like fine, I guess. I just like from a subjective lens, I just am not a big fan of that design decision. I think that like my subjective arguable point is that I think the game would have been better served off being one story. And if they wanted their morality thing, I don't know. I would still stick with one faction and just have the faction be goodish and baddish, or maybe just make multiple games. I think Fates advertises itself in a very like so. Fire Emblem Fates is the game that came between Awakening and Three Houses, and it's a pretty terrible game. In terms of story, like the story is just terrible. Gameplay is okay. It's quite good in Conquest, but that game was sold as 2 different games that are like both like opposite paths on the same story. I mean, that's like a cool, interesting idea. It's like actually taking like the Pokemon idea, but then like logically taking it to its conclusion. But in practice, it ended up just not being that interesting, in my opinion. Like, I feel like even now, even though Awakening's story and characters are inferior to Three Houses, I find myself still coming back to Awakening just because number one, Awakening's characters were so one-dimensional that they end up being way more interesting in this very like static world where characters don't change. So because they're written slightly worse, they actually are more interesting because they don't change, and it's just like funny to see Lon Q like being afraid of women all the time. It's that's more entertaining than like watching Ferdinand von Ayer never learn the correct lesson, or watching Lorenz going through the same character arc with every single support conversation, right, which makes no sense. Like he A ranks he A ranks Marianne and then learns to not be an awful person, but then you see him up with Hilda and he's like immediately awful. It makes no sense, right? So like I don't know, it's just very confusing. Like I I have a lot of like I think all the problems like the Three Houses team had the story, they had the characters, they had the writing staff. It is literally the format of the game that screwed the story in my opinion.
Mhm.
And I think if it had been linear, they would not have had any of these problems. If it had been linear and the support, they could have had characters changing. Like it could have been great. Like I don't know.
Mhm.
This is a dangerous take because a lot of people like the branching story paths and stuff in Fire Emblem. So
Yeah, do you want to know a game that really supports your opinion?
what?
Have you ever heard the story of Resident Evil 6?
No. I know nothing about the Resi games.
So, Resident Evil 6 is an interesting game in that the first 3 Resident Evils are sort of like, survival horror type games. They sort
Yeah.
of they're strongly in that genre. Resident Evil 4 was praised because it took a more action-oriented approach to it. So clearly, Capcom was like, well, if it's working, let's just increase the action in the sequel. And in
Oh, yeah.
5, there was a lot of action, but it was still fine. It was still like a single storyline, and there was a lot of action. Like a lot of people were like, okay, that's good, but like maybe don't do that more. So Capcom, of course, in their infinite wisdom, decided to quadruple this by making essentially 4 distinct storylines for Resident Evil 6.
Wait, what? Really? That's Resident
So yeah, so Resident Evil 6, they were like, okay, we have like a survival horror fan base, and we also have a more interested in the action fan base. So we're gonna make 4 storylines. One of them is gonna be spy and espionage. One of them is gonna be non-stop action. One of them is gonna be like Resident Evil 4, and then one of them is gonna be just a shitty remake of Resident Evil 3. So they essentially they put the entire studio on these like 4 distinct games, and of course it was a total clusterfuck because just like everyone, like no one had enough time to finish it. With the 4th storyline, this espionage one, like it never really got finished. It got released later, I think, and like it was like just terrible. And Resident Evil 6 nowadays is known as like the low point in the Resident Evil series. It's
Wait,
like,
are they like related to each other? Are they like adjacent?
there are crossovers, definitely. They'll appear and like each storyline is very linear in its reaction.
But like, can you play through them simultaneously, or is it like 4 games?
No, it's essentially 4 games. You play through one, and then you play through another one, and you're like, oh, I remember this from that game.
That's so dumb. What?
I know.
Well, at least if you play through them simultaneously, it could be like one of those novels with multiple perspectives, right? Like,
right. It's like you have to I believe you play through one storyline completely, then you play through the next one, then you play through the next one, and I think you can choose the order of which one you play first, but it's still very distinct storylines.
The only game that did this correctly was what's that Kirby game called? The Superstar Collection or whatever. The one with Meta Knight's Revenge. That's the only game that did this well. Yeah. I forget what it's called. I think Superstar Saga. No. That's the DS game.
Superstar Allies, maybe.
No. That is the Switch game very recently.
That's a Switch game.
I don't remember. It's a game that was released in the 90s for the SNES.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not really sure.
Cool.
By the way, the 80 is coming. I mean, the Residential Evil.
Oh yeah. Resi, how do you feel about that? Do you think haven't they kind of recovered though? Haven't they gotten better?
So 7 was a complete change. They swapped to a first-person camera, and then they made the bunch of remakes, which 1 and 2 were like very well praised as remakes. 3 had some mixed reactions. Mostly just because they were like, hey, in Resident Evil 2, you have this like Mr. X stalking you around, and like Resident Evil 3 was built around this big stalker character, but instead of making it a dynamic stalking character like most people thought they would, they made it sort of a like I appear in 3 cutscenes and boss like very staged boss battles.
God, that's like less scary than freaking Spooky's Jump House. You know that game's the Spooky Jump House
I do
game?
know that game, yes.
That game is scary as heck and has like the dumbest graphics. Like,
I know.
yeah, what the heck? That's so depressing.
But yeah,
Anyway,
like
we're getting distracted by Resident Evil. We should probably get back to choices.
probably.
Yeah, so I'm just curious. Do you guys agree? Do you think this is a reasonable take? I'm sure you probably have a more moderated opinion. Maybe you're more friendly towards branching paths, but I just utterly despise them. Like,
I mean, I definitely see where you're coming from, where like a lot of the times when they have branching paths, it's either if you have like very distinct branching paths and it's easy to go between them. I think that's what makes the Henry Stickmin games good, is that you can go between them incredibly easily. But like in a story like, oh, I don't know, Minecraft story mode, for example, where you go through it and then partway through there's you can either go for Magnus option or you can go for whoever the other one was. And then it just goes like that for one chapter. It's like, if you're going to play either of them anyways, then you might as well have had them go to both locations and have like a coherent storyline. But if you don't expect them to play either of them anyways, then you're missing like a quarter of the game that could have been just sent into the other part of it.
Yeah, actually, that's a great example. Minecraft story. Why did I not think of Minecraft, the story game? Okay, I've not played that game, but like one of my friends did, and he just like complained to me so much about it. Like,
it's interesting.
yeah. Okay, so this is a really obscure iteration of this trope, but in Hyrule Warriors, in the campaign of the game, there's this moment where the characters split up and like they go to the 3 worlds, like the Skyward Sword world, the Twilight Princess world, and the Ocarina of Time world. But like you go through those simultaneously, like you can just do them in whatever order, but like you do all the content. So like that's not a branching path. That's just like that's like that. That's more like Super Mario 64 versus Super Mario Galaxy, in that like Super Mario 64 is not a branching path version of Galaxy. It's just a free form version, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like when I mean branching path, I'm talking about like the Minecraft dungeon example, which is like why?
Right.
Yeah.
Very distinct, yeah.
Yeah, like I just think it's silly. Like even like that's why I like these visual novel games, because they let you go back and see stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very recently. What's another game that like Henry Stickmin does that? Like Catherine should do that. I think Catherine should let you just go back to whatever day you were on and just like let you replay the game from wherever. But I understand the devs think that like that gets in the way of having the full story experience. But the instant you introduce branching paths that are telegraphed via like Mass Effect like decision prompt, you've immediately killed the immersion. Because real life, the branching paths come from your gameplay decisions, as I said earlier, not from the big like Mass Effect like selection prompts, right? In real life, the decisions come from like how you played the game, right? Like again, real life works a lot like Long Live the Queen. So again, that would be my response to the branching path, is that if you want to have your branching path, make it like Henry Stickmin. Right. So what I think is that the Catherine devs should combine, should have a crossover event. I think that would be age appropriate. Have you guys played Catherine? You know what I'm talking about? Like
I've heard of Catherine.
Oh yeah,
I have not played it.
Very, very interesting game.
Interesting, yes. What are your opinions on Undertale branching paths?
Oh, I've not finished Undertale, so I actually I know it'd be weird. Normally I talk about Undertale. I've not finished that game, so I don't want to speak about it. I know it's weird. Like I should be talking about Undertale, right? Undertale is like the most classic example, but I've just not finished that game, which is really weird. But
that's fair. I mean, I was really only gonna ask because it sort of has a connection, gameplay reasoning for getting the very distinct branching paths.
So from what I understand of Undertale, which is very little, and like I would rather not be spoiled, is that like the decisions you make, like the game, like from what I gathered so far, like it seems to be very much more like Long Live the Queen than Henry Stickmin, and that like what you do in the RPG gameplay affects the story, and that just like makes sense to me. Like I'm sure Undertale does it correctly, right? Like I did not detect any Mass Effect moments in Undertale. Like I did not detect any like are you the bird or are you the bird cage moments, which instantly make me want to like like instantly leave. Like
Hmm.
I think the
Yeah.
worst menu in the history of Fire Emblem was the menu where you choose which house you go into because it tells you nothing. It just says like the yellow house likes bows. Like it's just it does not inform the player. It's like I just don't like if you're gonna do the branch because the one good thing about that menu is that it doesn't mislead the player like the Bioshock one does. Like they do tell you this will have major impact on gameplay, but like that should not be decided via like menu prompt. The only
Right.
menu prompt that should decide my gameplay should be the start game button. Like
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah. Again, that is just a subjective opinion I have, so that's entirely arguable. But like that's my take is that the only thing that should affect what kind of game I play should be the start. Actually, that's the last menu that will decide what my game is, and
Hmm.
then I'm in the game. So
And then also, when it comes to like indistinguishable options where they like, don't tell you what the like, I think this happens a lot in dialogue too, where it's just like happy, and you're like, well, what does that mean?
it's so
Like,
dumb. Like it's literally the pro ZD bit, right? Like
yeah. And then the funniest part is like, and like one of them works like arbitrarily. In the Henry Stickmin game, there's like this one part where you just have 3 hammers, and the only difference is it makes a slightly different sound. And they're
yeah.
able to get away with that joke simply because they know that you're gonna like click them all anyways, so it doesn't really matter.
It's so yeah, no, I love the hammer gag. You know, one of my favorite dumb gags in the Henry Stickmin games is this one where they actually do the Mass Effect prompt, and like the one on the left is like make a sheep sound,
Big sheep noise, yes.
and you just click on it, and it just makes a sheep sound, and it goes back. Like it just goes back. Like it.
Nothing
Oh,
happens. It's
God.
like, all right.
Oh God, it's so funny. And like Charles is like, what? I don't know what that means.
I don't know what that means.
I don't know what that means. Oh, that's so funny. Okay, yeah, no, that's yeah, no. Again, as I said, like the Henry Stickmin games, you should play. If you haven't played Long Live the Queen, you should play that game. I think you would like that. I think everyone should play that game. It's definitely like it like looks like anime. It looks like an anime kid game, but then like you play it and it's like Crusader Kings for some reason. Like, people
Nice.
just like people just die. It's kind of out of control. I have no idea why it's like aesthetically presented like a Sailor Moon fan game. I just don't get it. But yeah,
Who knows?
cool. Well, I think we've sufficiently gone off track, which means that I think the Q&A is complete unless we have any more discussion questions.
I have you? I'm thinking about. Have you ever played a game that which making decision is bottom up, not top down? Just like someone died and you choose how could a murderer killed him, and then just choose, then just go back to the original of this case, and then you reveal all this just a story, the decision you make.
Oh, that's interesting. Is there a game where you can do it like is there a game where the decision you make just becomes true? Like that? That's a cool idea for a game though. That'd be a good time travel game.
Yeah, I think. Ooh, is there a game like that?
I feel like there is, right? Isn't there like this mystery ghost game? I forget what it's called. No, I don't think that's the gimmick.
I think that there is a mystery game. I think where if you make a faulty assumption early on, it impacts the rest of the story, so that like you just believe it to be true. But I can't remember
Wow,
that
that's
entirely.
cool.
I think
cool.
it has like Lovecraftian elements to it, I believe. In that like as you progress, you like either go insane or not, judging by like which things you pick up.
Well, that's
I'm not
cool.
entirely sure.
I like that. That's
yeah.
fun.
That'd be a cool idea at the very least. I'm not sure. I can't remember which game it actually is
I don't
that
know.
does that.
So like what I will say is that kind of decision making is actually really cool. That's like a good way to turn my argument on its head because you've made the well, I don't know. It would if you could make that sufficiently mechanically different, like if that decision making scheme is utterly isomorphic to just branching paths, then it's actually not that different, right? Like if that is just like another way to say, hi, I have a branching path where you like it just has a time travel element, then I guess it's not that much different. But again, I think the main problem is that like right like if you're gonna make a decision that impacts a story like that, the player needs to know, it needs to be communicated to the player. And then you have two options as the game is you either communicate it subtly And if you want to see an example of that failing, you can look at the Bioshock example, where this seems like the game is suddenly telling you it matters and it doesn't. Or you can do the opposite, where it looks like a decision doesn't matter at all, which is like choose what homeroom teacher you want to be. And then the game says, by the way, this decision decides what game you're playing. Right. So like there has to be a way to get between both that isn't like ideally every single decision should look like the Bioshock decision and matter as much as the Three Houses decision, right? And no decision should even be close to whatever the heck this is.
just no.
Right? Like that's basically like that's what I'm saying like these branching path games should do. Like I think that's like the only acceptable branching path I'll accept. Because like what's really useful is that if enough of your gameplay is naturally just about things that can be essentially reduced to menu going, like a role-playing game or a grand strategy game, then you can essentially hide like these kind of branching path decisions into the gameplay. So like in a game like Bioshock, you just use the trigger buttons, right, to choose, which is really good because those are also the buttons you like. They're very clever, right? The buttons to choose are the same as the buttons to shoot, right, or like to use the gun. That's so smart because it's trying to link the gameplay to this other gameplay element. It's trying to argue that the decision making is part of the core gameplay. And I wish it mattered as much, like whether or not I shot I wish it mattered as much for what brooch I chose as much as whether or not I got the kill on the monster and if he was going to kill me or not. Like, so like they're definitely trying. Like they're thinking about it. They're not unintelligent, but I just think it should be done in a better way. Like I think there's no excuse. This is a AAA team. Like I don't understand why Bioshock Infinite does that. That's not great.
I will say for Bioshock Infinite, a bit of like lore and history behind the game itself. I believe when it was first announced, it was going to be a lot more of an open world type game, where you sort of go around and like the enemies you kill in one location can affect other things, and they had like very huge ambitions for it. But then I think technically the console, one of the consoles they wanted to port it to, just did not have enough like memory space for them to do that, so they had to scale back rapidly, sort of near the end of production.
Well, then in that case, maybe it's fine, but still.
Yeah, I mean, it's still not.
It's cool. Like I like that stuff. That's good. It's good. But I'm saying that you don't have to make like you don't have to be that open world. Like I feel like sometimes devs like the idea of being open world and non-linear to the point where they'll sacrifice a good game on the altar of like what I'm saying is that linear games don't have to be like lame. You know, like make linear games sexy again. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
All right. I think that is all the questions and answers. But this is a very interesting discussion. So thanks so much for listening in. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And definitely try to debate me in the comments. I'm down. I'm ready for some discourse, free speech. So, but yeah, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the hot takes. Bye. Okay. Stop the screen share.